Okay, I'll just turn the other mic around. Okay, so we're all set. So let's read through Psalms 23 again. And I want you to think about this when you're reading through it. It doesn't make sense. If you read Psalms 23, it doesn't make sense. One minute you're out in the field, you're talking about sheep, you're talking about out in the wilderness and all this stuff, then all of a sudden you're setting the table and then your cup is running over. And when I used to read it before, it just didn't seem to flow with me. After reading about that Bob Boyd's book on it, it's so much clearer to me what it is. So in my feeble attempts, I'm going to try to make it clearer to you too, what a lot of these things mean from a shepherd's point of view. Okay? The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of shadow of death, I will fear no evil. For thou art with me, thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Let's just pray before we start. Dear Father, we just thank you for this great passage, Lord. A great passage shows what a great shepherd you are, Lord. You meet our needs, Lord. You look after us. And Lord, we are a stupid bunch. We are so much like the sheep, Lord. And you continue to forgive us, Lord, and you continue to love us, Lord. We thank you for this. So, Lord, use this little time to learn about your word, Lord, and pray for this in your name. Amen. So let's been after me. Slow down. She says, think before you talk once in a while. So, anyway, these are the tools of a shepherd. If you read in the Bible about a staff, this is what a staff looks like. You know the ones with the big loops? That's only in Hollywood. Boyd showed a shepherd one of those ones with the big loops, and the guy laughed. He said, "What is that?" They never seen one like that because they don't hook them around the neck. That's from Bugs Bunny, Roadrunner Hour. So remember that they used to catch the sheep with the big hook? Well, this is what a real staff looks like. So Paulette and I went out Monday night looking for a staff like this, and we couldn't find one. Although our dog printer ate a rabbit. We didn't find the stick, so I had to come home and make one. It's amazing what you can do with PL, screws, wire, and a couple sticks of wood. That is a staff. This is a rod. So we're going to be learning about these two tools this morning. This is used by a shepherd as much as a staff. A shepherd never goes without both of these, and you'll learn why this morning. So I'll use them for, I was going to get all the kids to come up and pretend they were sheep this morning and beat them around like the shepherds do. It was going to be too much fun, but anyway, we're not going to do that this morning. So let's start. The Lord is my shepherd. This point of view is not about humans. It is a sheep talking about the person who looks after them. This is a sheep's point of view this morning that we're looking at. So if you can imagine, let's picture this great big field. All the sheep are gathered there. All the shepherds have brought their sheep in. It's market time. They're on their way to go home. They got all sheared. So here we have all these sheep sitting around. And these sheep are talking to each other. And they're saying, "Oh, my shepherd, oh, he's lazy. You know, he doesn't look after us. He lets us just run about, you know." Other sheep are saying, "Oh, my shepherd's better than that. At least he gives us fresh water." There's 4 things a sheep needs. Who can tell me the 4 things a sheep needs? Water is probably number 1. Food. Protection. One more real important one. I don't know what people are saying. You have to speak up good. Rest. They need rest. If you let a sheep go on a sheep, now we had sheep, our grandfather had sheep when we were young. But a sheep needs all these things. If they don't have enough water, they're not good. If they don't have enough, this and that, they need all 4 of these things. And they need protection. Sheep are quite stupid. If you put a sheep, they would walk right towards a bear probably because they're not that, and they're cowardly and they're all these things. So sheep are a lot like us. So he says, the Lord is my shepherd. This is the sheep talking about their shepherd. So here in this whole bunch of sheep that we have in this field, there's all these sheep that love their shepherd. We're going to be talking about those sheep that love their shepherd. So when it comes time for the sheep to pick out the shepherd to pick out his sheep in the crowd and start home, they have a long, hard journey home. Remember Joseph in the Old Testament? when he went to visit his brothers and he would take them food, his brothers were a long ways away. They were 80 miles away. So oftentimes these shepherds have to take their flocks a long ways. So here the shepherd, he's getting ready to take his flocks away from the other ones. They're done with the marketing. They're on their way home. And that's how we're going to look at this chapter today. These sheep are on their way home with the shepherd. And these sheep love their shepherd. These sheep are telling all the other sheep how good their shepherd is. That's what this chapter is all about. They're bragging. Now, some of you guys brag about your wives. I know at work I sometimes brag about Platin, so no one else wants to talk about their wife because, my wife's better. Well, that's what these sheep are like. Their shepherd is better than everybody else's shepherd. And we're going to see why this morning. We're going to see what the shepherd does to look after his sheep. And it's quite exciting. I read this 5 or 6 times, and every morning this week at 4 o'clock, I said, I don't know how pastors do it. Like, when I have to speak, it's on my mind. Might not show it. So I woke up every morning quoting Psalms 23, thinking about sheep and all this stuff. So if I jump around a bit, that's because I've been thinking about it so much I got a headache from it. But anyway, here are these sheep. So the shepherd wants to call us these sheep. So what Boyd's wife did, she went to the herd one day and she tried to call out some sheep. Well, they don't move. But as soon as the shepherd calls out, the sheep know his voice. That's how shepherds find their sheep. I have a feeling, and in some ways their robe would have it, the sheep would be used to seeing, maybe a red robe, whatever. But for the most part, when the shepherd wants a sheep, he calls them out. Now, when we were growing up, Blake can attest to this, my mother, when it was supper time, you had to be there. If you were late for supper, you didn't get supper alcohol. She would feed us later. But even if we had missionaries standing at their house, if they weren't there at supper time, we went ahead and ate without them. You had to be at our table at 5 o'clock or 4:30, whatever time. So what you would hear, I better turn the mic sideways, woo-hoo! And we could hear it all the way down to Shaddix. A mile away, we could hear my mother calling for supper, and that was our 10 minutes to get home. Well, that's what this shepherd does. This shepherd calls his sheep. So the first thing, he starts walking away, and his sheep starts coming up from all the other herds, and they start following him. And here's one of the first things the shepherd does with his staff. He'll take, and he walks by that herd, and he'll count them all, and he touches them all with his staff. And he'll go through the whole herd and count them all, and he touches every one of them all the way down the line. And some say they know the name of every sheep, and some of the herds are 100. So the main thing about the staff is it's also a thing of comfort for them. When he touches them, that means they're all in line, that means they're going. Then when he starts walking, when he walks with the staff out like this. The sheep never go by the staff. The shepherd is the leader. When the shepherd walks, the sheep follow. They don't run ahead. They don't do all this. They just stay behind him and they follow him. And that's important later on when we start reading through this chapter, how important it is to have the sheep follow you. Because as a rule, sheep, like I said before, are quite stupid. And I think that's why God chose in the Bible to compare us to sheep. Now, he was telling the story too where when they started leading, one sheep was just running around. He was butting other sheep. He just wanted to play. And he would go into the herd and take that sheep that was acting up. And that's where the rod come in handy. When you hear about the rod in the Old Testament, this is what they were comparing to. Now, kids, if you were my kid, this is what I would beat you with. But anyway, they were saying he seen a sheep one day and the sheep was acting up. So he went in, he grabbed a hold of that sheep, gave it a tongue lashing all the way out, but he took it separate from the other sheep and he whacked him on the butt. That is what they talk about in the Bible, in Psalms and stuff, they talk about using the rod for discipline. That's the stick they're using about, and that's what the shepherds used to do to teach these sheep. And he said when that sheep went back in the herd, that sheep was good. So anyway, let's start reading through it. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Remember the things we talked about. They need water, food, protection, and rest. The shepherd, a good shepherd, looks after all these things. So, next thing we read, he maketh me to lie down in green pastures. So here they're on this journey. They're on their way back to home. It might take them 2-3 months. They're up in the mountains. They're traveling. That's where our story is going to take place today. So he says, he maketh me to lie down in green pastures. Well, here's the thing about sheep. Sheep don't know when to stop. They don't know when to stop eating. They're kind of stupid. So what he does, once again, with the staff, when he gets to a place where they're going to rest, he'll take and he'll go and he'll touch every sheep with that thing and lay them down. He'll take another sheep and he spaces them all out. You don't let them all crumble up and eat and eat and eat because they will keep eating and eating and eating. So what he does, he takes them and he touches them back in and they all start laying down. And he'll go through the whole field and get all his sheep laying down. That is the rest part. They find comfort in that staff. It's not always a weapon, it's not always a tool. A lot of times it brings comfort to them. Remember, they used them for counting. When you count them up, you use the rod. Now he's separating them and getting them to lie down. That's why he says, he maketh to lie down in green pastures. A sheep will eat and eat and eat until they're sick. Now, I don't know what a cow and a sheep is called, but they're the ones that regurgitate. What do they call that? Chewing the cud. They chew the cud. So that's why you have to be very careful how much a sheep eats. You have to monitor how much they eat, and that's one of the jobs of a shepherd. They have to get food, but you have to also make the thing. So he says he makes them to lie down in streams in still waters. Now here's another thing. We talked about waters before. Remember that water is one of the first things the sheep needs. Well, in our story today, there's going to be two kinds of places they get water. The first one, he says he leads them beside still waters. So here they are, they're on their journey. He's taking the sheep. They're all following him. They don't pass him. They all follow him. So he's come to a water, and the water there is quite fast. Well, a sheep won't drink out of raging fast water. A sheep is scared of water, the noise, all the stuff. Sheep would almost die of thirst before they will go to a real fast stream. So what the shepherd does, he takes the rod, and he'll go to the edge of the water, and he'll stay back a little bit, and he'll start digging a hole. He might take an hour. And he digs a long trench, and then he widens it out. All the while, the sheep are sitting there waiting. The sheep won't go near the fast water. Then when they're all ready, he opens the last little bit to let the water run in. That water's the still water. When he says, he leads me beside still waters, that's what they're talking about. So now, there's a raging stream there, but the shepherd has allowed a little pool to gather. So what the shepherd does, he takes his staff and his rod, and he stands between them and the water, and the sheep come up and they have their fill of water. They're protected, they're safe, they don't have to go near the raging water. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me once again. That leads me beside the still waters. It's a raging stream, but he quiets it down, he makes a pool for them, and they all come and drink. Then he says, he restoreth my soul. That's the whole thing again. After the water, after the sheep have their fill of water, they've had their fill of food now. Now it's time for them to rest. And he'll lay them all down, he'll spread them all out, and then they'll rest. Now, he maketh me lie down in green pastures, he leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul, he leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. That part, for his name's sake, that shepherd has a reputation. That shepherd, this shepherd we're talking about today, all the other shepherds would know that this shepherd was a good shepherd. He would make sure his sheep were watered. He would make sure they're fed. He would make sure they're protected. When he leads them down a path, he would never lead them through the woods in the wilderness unknown. He would always go ahead, and he would always be looking for danger. He'd always be looking for wolves and coyotes and lions or whatever there would be. He leads them in the paths of righteousness. He takes them on this journey. Remember, they're going back to their home. They've got a couple-week journey, and he looks after them, and it's for his name's sake. It's his whole reputation is on the line. All this traced back, when you think about everything I've said so far, is how God looks after us. God takes all the fast things of the world, and he'll take us aside to a quiet pool and feed us. He'll look after us. He protects us. And we have the best shepherd there ever is. So he says, for his name's sake. So that shepherd, everything he does is because of his love for the sheep. Now, you know, in the New Testament, there's a place where it talks about the hireling. These guys that are hard to look after sheep. They don't do these things. They don't go all the way out of their way to make sure the sheep are looked after, all this stuff. A good shepherd really looks after sheep. Then it says, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. So here they're on their journey. They're probably going through a mountainside. A lot of times they go up in the high hills in the summer because it's cooler up there. And they have to come down out of the mountain. So what he does, the same thing. He doesn't want those sheep running down the mountain, because they'll get caught in the bushes, they'll go over the cliff and everything. So he also holds a stick out so the sheep can't go by him. But when he walks along, he's also, like Paulette, I never go for a walk without a stick. I love a stick. Beat Paulette if nothing else. But anyway, he always has a stick. Sometimes the sheep can't see the shepherd. Sometimes you get maybe 40, 50, 60 sheep going down the side of a mountain, trees and bushes and all this stuff. Randy, you might as well forget about that camera trying to stay on me. But anyway, when he's walking, they know this is a thing of safety. They know this thing protects them. But he also uses it, and he makes a noise with it all the time. So when they can't see the shepherd, they still know he's there. Some maybe play a flute. But they said most times they would use that stick and they would knock it on the rocks. And the sheep would always know, okay, we're still following. We know he's up there. We can't see him, but we know he's up there. He's looking after us again. But what happens with one sheep that he gets lost? Well, you heard the parable with the 99 sheep. This is the type of environment that sheep would get lost. All of a sudden you're going through the mountains. One sheep gets a little stupid. One sheep goes over the edge or whatever. Once again, the staff comes in handy. So what the shepherd does, he has to go back the trail and he has to start counting the sheep. He thinks one is missing. He always walks, a good shepherd always walks on the danger side of the cliff. Always on this danger side of the trail. He always keeps the sheep next to the bank where it's safe. So he goes back. When he sees a sheep that's gone or fallen or something, this is what he uses as rescue. This is also a rescuing tool. Now, in the Hollywood would have you think that the big hook, I told you earlier, where they hook the sheep by the neck. Well, you imagine reach down and hooking a sheep by the neck to get him up off the cliff. What they do with this thing, they wind it in his wool. They push it down, they wind it up in his fur, and they pick him up by his fur. Now, that wouldn't be good after he gets shaved, there wouldn't be enough fur maybe. But that's how they use this. Plus they use it for climbing. This is a very handy, everybody, I'm going to make these. If anybody wants to buy them, they're $49.99. It's a really handy tool. But anyway, but that's what they do. He uses that to rescue them, and he gets them up. So this is where the rest of the chapter starts making more sense. Let's read a little bit further. He's just rescued this sheep, okay? He's going through the valley of shadow of death. One sheep got hurt. He went back and got that sheep. He goes back to the front line, and he takes the whole herd down to safety. Meanwhile, he's carrying that injured sheep with him. And yea, though I walk the valley of shadow of death, I will fear no evil. Thou art with me, thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. These are things of comfort. The discipline, the digging the hole, the supplying the water, the walking, the tapping, the counting, all these things, the sheep find great comfort in these things. But now we have an injured sheep. So what he does, he goes to prepare a table. Now, this has nothing to do with Sunday dinner. This is not the kind of table. What the shepherd does, he takes that injured sheep, and he'll take it, and he'll go get the other sheep all laid down. He'll take the injured sheep, lay it down. He'll take his rod and lay it down. That's staff, sorry. He'll take his rod and lay it down. He'll take his cloak off and lay it down. And that sheep that's injured will lay in that table that he prepared for that sheep. That sheep is injured. He might have hurt his leg. He might have got cut. He did all the thing. And then he stands on the other side. So when they all go to rest, he lays down over here. That sheep is protected. None of the other sheep will go over that rod, over that cloak, or over that staff. He has prepared a table for that sheep to get rest and to heal up. Then, they always carry a cruse of oil. There's a picture in the book now. It just looks like a little thing hangs on their belt. He would take that oil, and that their calf, that lamb is injured in any way, he'll rub oil on it. That'll cleanse it. That'll keep infection out. And that other thing, that protects it. Now here's, why do we need those things? When he prepares that table, the staff, the cloak, the rod, why do these sheep need protection? It's from each other. Sheep are like chickens. If anyone knows a chicken, I worked with a chicken farmer for years. Jeremy Foreign, big chicken farmer. I always had about 200 chickens. If one chicken gets injured, if one chicken shows blood, if they get a wound, the other chickens will just start picking at it. And they'll pick at it and pick at it. If you don't take that chicken out, they will eventually kill that chicken. Sheep are very much like that. If there's an injured sheep, all the other sheep, which are supposedly the same family, the same herd, will pick at their lamb. And that lamb will have a hard time getting better. So that's why the shepherd prepares a table to protect that little sheep, to give him time to heal, to give him time to rest, to eat. And all the other sheep won't go near him. They keep their distance. And he might have to stay there for a day or two to protect that little sheep till he gets better and can walk. So when it says, prepares the table before me, don't be thinking food. Think protection. Think the shepherd does all these things to protect that sheep. I've lost my notes altogether, but let's just keep on going. That prepares the table before me. That anoints my head with oil, and my cup runneth over. Now, once again, the cup running over has nothing to do with a pot of tea or a Tim Hortons. Okay? What they do in these places, before, remember we talked about the raging stream, and we talked about how there's different ways that they get water to these sheep. Well, the second way is they use springs. So you can't have a whole bunch of sheep led into a spring and expect them to get in the spring and drink water, because they would either fall in the spring, the well, or whatever. So over the years, these shepherds have made what they call cups. And what they're big stone things. They're usually 18 inches wide, 2 or 3 feet long, and they hollow them out. And by every spring, they leave a bucket there all the time for shepherds. So when the shepherds come through, there's a bucket already supplied, and there's a cup or a dish or a trough. My cup running over. A good shepherd, this is what a good shepherd does. He goes, fills that water, and he pours it in the cup. He fills that, pours it in. Fills it, pours it in. Pours it in, let it overflow for a while. Because those rocks are steaming hot by now. They're 90, 100 degrees, in the hot sun. He cools the rocks off. A good shepherd keeps my cup running over. He fills that trough so the water runs out, and then he calls the sheep, and the sheep start drinking the nice, cool spring water. And he not only stops, the whole time the sheep are drinking, he just keeps dumping water. It's kind of like the story we read last week about Rachel. Remember how she fed all those camels? Well, that's what a good shepherd does. A good shepherd just constantly is keeping that water filled. Those sheep can come and drink, and they go take a little walk and back and drink, and he will make sure that those sheep are well watered. My cup runneth over. So next time you hear about his cup running over, like I said, it's nothing to do with Tim Hortons coffee. It has to do with fresh water from a spring, and the shepherd is supplying it for his sheep. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life. Now there's, in the past, I've heard this many times, they say these are the dogs of the shepherd. Surely goodness and mercy are the 3 dogs. Well, in Palestine, no good shepherd, no shepherd with a good reputation or a sense of worth would ever use a dog around sheep. That's Australia and all those places. In Palestine, where a lot of the Bible was probably written in that area, they use shepherds and shepherds alone to look after the sheep. So surely goodness and mercy, what does that mean? Well, I got to tell you right now, I forget, and I'm going to have to check my notes. It just means that these sheep have no worries. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life. These sheep are so comfortable with the shepherd. They've never been left. They've never been left wanting for water. They've never been left wanting for protection. He's always there. He goes ahead of them. He checks the trails. He does all these things. He supplies them water at the river. He supplies them water at the springs. He gives them safety. He looks after them. He protects them when they're hurt. It says, surely goodness and mercy, all these great things, they're not going to stop. He is a good shepherd. They're going to keep going and going and going. It's kind of like the Energizer Bunny that, you get so tired of the advertisements because he just keeps going and going. A good shepherd is always going to be doing the best for the sheep, looking after the sheep, supplying for the sheep. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life. And I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Now, when I read this story before, I was thinking, now this doesn't really make sense. Right up to now, I read Boyd's book and it talked about all the things the shepherd does. But let's turn to Samuel. I think it's 2 Samuel. If you have your Bibles this morning, turn to 2 Samuel. Now, this is a great story. We're going to be just looking at the tail end of it. Who can tell me David's first major downfall? What happened to David that he slept with Bathsheba? And because of that, David's life was changed forever, and David went through a great time of mourning. Well, who can remember who came to visit David after all this? Nathan. And who can tell me the story? Anybody want to risk telling the story of what Nathan said to him? I'm going to read it to you. It's just to take the pressure off. Okay, let's turn to 2 Samuel chapter 12. We're only going to read the first 3 verses. And the Lord sent Nathan unto David. Now, this is after David slept with Bathsheba. David's life was upside down. I think the baby died before this happened, all this stuff. So David's in a great time of mourning. And Nathan comes to see him. The Lord sent Nathan to David, and he came into him and said, there were 2 men in one city, the one rich and the other poor. The rich man had exceedingly many flocks and herds. But the poor man had nothing, save one little ewe, lamb, which he had brought up nourished. And it grew together with him and with his children, and did eat of his own meat, and drank of his own cup, and lay in his bosom, and was with him as a daughter. So here we have the story of David. David was a rich man in the story. David had everything. He had riches, wealth, power. He had kingdoms. He had I don't think he had a what do you call it, a castle or a temple. He didn't have a temple at that time. That was Solomon's job to build the temple. But David had everything he could ever want, and he went and took this man's wife. Well, God compares it to a rich man and a poor man. The rich man taken the one thing the poor man had was a little ewe calf. But you read it, ewe lamb. But in this story, this is what it talks about forever and ever. He says he brought that lamb in. That lamb ate with them. He slept with them. He fed with them. He drank with them. That is what Christ does us. He brings us into his home. Our whole lives is waiting for the day that we go home to be with Christ. He's going to take us up there someday. We're going to live forever and ever. Like this little ewe was going to spend his whole life with this poor lad till David came and took him. That was the way of life in that. Often they would take one of the lambs, because I guess the lamb is some cute, soft, cuddly. Boy's wife that day, she tried to call the sheep to come out to her. They wouldn't come. She couldn't catch one. She couldn't grab them. They would run away from her because she wasn't the shepherd. The shepherd went up that day, picked up one of the little babies, handed it to her. And that baby just laid in her arms like it was a pet all his life. Because the shepherd, he had faith in the shepherd, and the shepherd handed this to Bob's wife, and she said it was the most beautiful thing. So in that country, they often use sheep as pets, and they'll take them in their home. That's what it means when he goes into his house and lives with them forever and ever. That's when God takes us and takes us into his home forever and ever, and a good shepherd does that. So anyway, that's the story about Psalms 23. So we're going to read the Psalms 23 one more time and just see if you think of it any differently. Maybe I just confused you the whole time, but think about different things as we read it and see if your mind changes anything. The Lord is my shepherd. This is the point of view of a sheep. I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restores my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. For thou art with me, thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest the table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Let's just close in a word of prayer. If I would just think of this time, Lord, I just pray that you be with us in the morning service. We just pray for Pastor Q as he comes, Lord, that you would speak to us. Lord, give us a good time. Lord, we do thank you for each one in this church. We have a very good church, Lord. We thank you for it. Thank you for the people. Thank you to meet with us this morning. And we do pray for all these things in your name and your sake.